Section 7, Part 1, Chapter 2 of The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Madariaga, the Centaur. In 1870, Marcelo Desnoyers was 19 years old. He was born in the suburbs of Paris, an only child. His father, interested in little building speculations, maintained his family in modest comfort. The mason wished to make an architect of his son, and Marcelo was in the midst of his preparatory studies when his father suddenly died, leaving his affairs greatly involved. In a few months, he and his mother descended the slopes of ruin, and were obliged to give up their snug, middle-class quarters and live like laborers. When the 14-year-old boy had to choose a trade, he learned wood carving. This craft was an art related to the tastes awakened in Marcelo by his abandoned studies. His mother retired to the country, living with some relatives, while the lad advanced rapidly in the shops, aiding his master in all the important orders which he received from the provinces. The first news of the war with Prussia surprised him in Marseilles, working on the decorations of a theater. Marcelo was opposed to the empire like all the youths of his generation. He was also much influenced by the older workmen who had taken part in the Republic of '48 and who still retained vivid recollections of the coup d'etat of the 2nd of December. One day he saw in the streets of Marseilles a popular manifestation in favor of peace which was practically a protest against the government. The old Republicans, in their implacable struggle with the Emperor, the companies of the International, which had just been organized, and a great number of Italians and Spaniards who had fled their countries on account of recent insurrections, composed the procession. A long-haired, consumptive student was carrying the flag. "It is peace that we want, a peace which may unite all mankind," chanted the paraders. But on this earth the noblest propositions are seldom heard, since destiny amuses herself in perverting them and turning them aside. Scarcely had the friends of peace entered the Rue Canebière with their hymn and standard when war came to meet them, obliging them to resort to fist and club. The day before, some battalions of Zouaves from Algiers had disembarked in order to reinforce the army on the frontier, and these veterans, accustomed to colonial existence and undiscriminating as to the cause of disturbances, seized the opportunity to intervene in this manifestation, some with bayonets and others with ungirded belts. Hurrah for the war! And a rain of lashes and blows fell upon the unarmed singers. Marcelo saw the innocent student, the standard bearer of peace, knocked down, wrapped in his flag, by the merry kicks of the Zouaves. Then he knew no more, since he had received various blows with a leather strap and a knife thrust in his shoulder. He had to run the same as the others. That day developed for the first time his fiery, stubborn character, irritable before contradiction, even to the point of adopting the most extreme resolution. Down with war! Since it was not possible for him to protest in any other way, he would leave the country. The emperor might arrange his affairs as best he could. The struggle was going to be long and disastrous, according to the enemies of the empire. If he stayed, he would in a few months be drawn for the soldiery. Desnoyers renounced the honor of serving the emperor. He hesitated a little when he thought of his mother, but his country relatives would not turn her out, and he planned to work very hard and send her money. Who knew what riches might be waiting for him on the other side of the sea? Goodbye, France. Thanks to his savings, a harbor official found it to his interest to offer him the choice of 3 boats. One was sailing to Egypt, another to Australia, another to Montevideo and Buenos Aires. Which made the strongest appeal to him? Desnoyers, remembering his readings, wished to consult the wind and follow the course that it indicated, as he had seen various heroes of novels do. But that day the wind blew from from the sea toward France. He also wished to toss up a coin in order to test his fate. Finally, he decided upon the vessel sailing first. Not until, with his scanty baggage, he was actually on the deck of the next boat to anchor, did he take any interest in its course. "For the Rio de la Plata." And he accepted these words with a fatalistic shrug. Very well, let it be South America. The country was not distasteful to him, since he knew it by certain travel publications whose illustrations represented herds of cattle at liberty, half-naked plumed Indians, and hairy cowboys whirling over their heads serpentine lassos tipped with balls. The millionaire Desnoyers never forgot that trip to America. 43 days navigating in a little worn-out steamer that rattled like a heap of old iron, groaned in all its joints at the slightest roughness of the sea, and had to stop 4 times for repairs, at the mercy of the winds and waves. In Montevideo, he learned of the reverses suffered by his country, and that the French Empire no longer existed. He felt a little ashamed when he heard that the nation was now self-governing, defending itself gallantly behind the walls of Paris. And he had fled. Months afterwards, the events of the Commune consoled him for his flight. If he had remained, wrath at the national downfall, his relations with his co-laborers, the air in which he lived, everything would surely have dragged him along to revolt. In that case, he would have been shot or consigned to a colonial prison like so many of his former comrades. So his determination crystallized, and he stopped thinking about the affairs of his mother country. The necessities of existence in a foreign land, whose language he was beginning to pick up, made him think only of himself. The turbulent and adventurous life of these new nations compelled him to most absurd expedients and varied occupations. Yet he felt himself strong, with an audacity and self-reliance which he never had in the old world. "I am equal to everything," he said, "if they only give me time to prove it." Although he had fled from his country in order not to take up arms, he even led a soldier's life for a brief period in his adopted land, receiving a wound in one of the many hostilities between the whites and reds in the unsettled districts. In Buenos Aires, he again worked as a woodcarver. The city was beginning to expand, breaking its shell as a large village. Desnoyers spent many years ornamenting salons and facades. It was a laborious existence, sedentary and remunerative, but one day he became tired of this slow saving, which could only bring him a mediocre fortune after a long time. He had gone to the New World to become rich, like so many others. And at 27 he started forth again, a full-fledged adventurer, avoiding the cities, wishing to snatch money from untapped natural sources. He worked farms in the forests of the north, but the locusts obliterated his crops in a few hours. He was a cattle driver, with the aid of only 2 peons, driving a herd of oxen and mules over the snowy solitudes of the Andes to Bolivia and Chile. In this life, making journeys of many months' duration across interminable plains, he lost exact account of time and space. Just as he thought himself on the verge of winning a fortune, he lost it all by an unfortunate speculation. And in a moment of failure and despair, being now 30 years old, he became an employee of Julio Madariaga. He knew of this rustic millionaire through his purchases of flocks, a Spaniard who had come to the country when very young, adapting himself very easily to its customs, and living like a cowboy after he had acquired enormous properties. The country folk, wishing to put a title of respect before his name, called him Don Madariaga. "Comrade," he said to Desnoyers one day when he happened to be in a good humor, a very rare thing for him, "you must have passed through many ups and downs. Your lack of silver may be smelled a long ways off. Why lead such a dog's life? Trust in me, Frenchy, and remain here. I am growing old and I need a man." After the Frenchman had arranged to stay with Madariaga, every landed proprietor living within 15 or 20 leagues of the ranch stopped the new employee on the road to prophesy all sorts of misfortune. "You will not stay long. Nobody can get along with Don Madariaga. We have lost count of his overseers. He is a man who must be killed or deserted. Soon you will go too." Desnoyers did not doubt but that there was some truth in all this. Madariaga was an impossible character, but feeling a certain sympathy with the Frenchman, had tried not to annoy him with his irritability. "He's a regular pearl, this Frenchy," said the plainsman, as though trying to excuse himself for his considerate treatment of his latest acquisition. "I like him because he is very serious. That is the way I like a man." Desnoyers did not know exactly what this much admired seriousness could be, but he felt a secret pride in seeing him aggressive with everybody else, even his family, whilst he took with him a tone of paternal bluffness. The family consisted of his wife, Misia Petrona, whom he always called the China, and two grown daughters who had gone to school in Buenos Aires, but on returning to the ranch had reverted somewhat to their original rusticity. Madariaga's fortune was enormous. He had lived in the field since his arrival in America, when the white race had not dared to settle outside the towns for fear of the Indians. He had gained his first money as a fearless trader, taking merchandise in a cart from fort to fort. He had killed Indians, was twice wounded by them, and for a while had lived as a captive with an Indian chief whom he finally succeeded in making his staunch friend. With his earnings, he had bought land, much land, almost worthless because of its insecurity, devoting it to the raising of cattle that he had to defend, gun in hand, from the pirates of the plains. Then he had married his China, a young half-breed who was running around barefoot, but owned many of her forefathers' fields. They had lived in an almost savage poverty on their property, which would have taken many a day's journey to go around. Afterwards, when the government was pushing the Indians towards the frontiers and offering the abandoned lands for sale, considering it a patriotic sacrifice on the part of anyone wishing to acquire them, Madariaga bought and bought at the lowest figure and the longest terms. To get possession of vast tracts and populate it with blooded stock became the mission of his life. At times, galloping with Desnoyers through his boundless fields, he was not able to repress his pride. "Tell me something, Frenchy. They say that further up the country there are some nations about the size of my ranches. Is that so?" The Frenchman agreed. The lands of Madariaga were indeed greater than many principalities. This put the old plainsman in a rare good humor, and he exclaimed in the cowboy vernacular, which had become second nature to him, "Then it wouldn't be absurd to proclaim myself king some day. Just imagine it, Frenchy, Don Madariaga the First. The worst of it all is that I would also be the last, for the China will not give me a son. She is a weak cow." End of section 7. Recording by Tony Oliva, Albuquerque, New Mexico.